is the ancient Persian method called Scaphism. Commonly referred to as the boats in ancient texts, this method began by stripping the criminal naked and placing them in some sort of tight wooden space, sometimes a hollowed-out log or a boat with beams running across the person's body. The hands and feet were bound, and the person was force-fed obscene amounts of honey and milk until they were forced to defecate and vomit all over themselves.
When faced with a punishment so terrifying that even nobles tremble, begging for death becomes the order of the day. But not so fast, because the horrors of Scaphism surpass death itself. Scaphism is an execution method with no shortcut. Practiced by one of the most brutal civilizations in history, it was designed to break both the body and soul while the mind watches in utter hopelessness. Many shiver at the mere mention of its name, and even history seems eager to forget its impact. How can a punishment be so gruesome that it becomes worse than death? Join us as we uncover more. A punishment worse than hell. Scaphism is a punishment where the victim doesn't just die, they are forced to watch themselves die. Slowly, painfully, day after day. It is like being buried alive, but worse. Because you are not buried in silence or darkness. You're buried in your own filth, surrounded by insects, rotting flesh, and unbearable pain, and you remain conscious through much of it. You see your own body fall apart. You smell yourself decaying. You feel yourself being eaten alive by tiny creatures, helpless to stop it. You are alive, but every second pulls you deeper into madness. This punishment was not simply created to end a man's life. It was made to destroy him mentally, emotionally, and physically. The very design of Scaphism shows just how far human cruelty can go. But where did such a horrific punishment come from? The word Scaphism comes from the Greek word scapha, which means boat or hollow vessel. That alone gives a good idea of how the execution worked. But even though the name is Greek, the punishment is said to have been used by the Achaemenid Persians, one of the most powerful empires in ancient history. There is one famous account of Scaphism. It was written by Plutarch, a Greek historian known for documenting the lives of powerful leaders.
Plutarch, whose full name was L. Mestrius Plutarchus, was born around AD 46, and he reached the ripe old age of 73 or 74. Plutarch was born in a town near Thebes, and he spent the majority of his life there.
In his work about Artaxerxes II, a Persian king, he shares the story of a soldier named Mithridates. This man met a fate so cruel, it has been remembered for thousands of years. In 401 BC, Artaxerxes II faced a rebellion from his own brother, Cyrus the Younger, who tried to steal the throne. During the battle, Cyrus was killed. The exact cause of his death was not clear, but Artaxerxes claimed that he personally delivered the final blow. It was a powerful political message, one that reinforced his strength and right to rule. But Mithridates, a soldier under Artaxerxes, made a fatal mistake. In a moment of pride, he told others that he was the one who had struck Cyrus down. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he just wanted recognition. But either way, it was seen as a direct insult to the king's honor. No one in Persia could challenge the king's version of events, especially not a mere soldier. And so, Mithridates was sentenced to death. But not just any death. He was to die by the boats. The process was carried out exactly as described. Mithridates was placed between the two wooden shells, and his body was exposed. He was force-fed milk and honey, and then he was left in the open, under the burning sun. Flies and other insects quickly gathered. They fed on him, nested on him, multiplied around him, and the rest was history. It is said that Mithridates survived like this for 17 days. 17 long, nightmarish days. By the time death finally came, he was no longer a man. His body was destroyed, his mind broken, and his soul long gone. But here's something interesting, and maybe even stranger than the punishment itself. The story of Mithridates is the only detailed record we have of Scaphism being used. Apart from Plutarch's account, no other Persian writings talk about it. This has led many historians to question whether the story was real or whether it was exaggerated to paint the Persians as cruel monsters. Greek writers often portrayed their enemies, especially the Persians, as brutal and inhumane. Still, despite these doubts, the story of Mithridates has persisted for over 2,000 years. Some believe the execution was real, but described under a different name. Ancient texts have referred to the punishment as death by insects or torture by decay. There are also whispers of similar practices in other ancient cultures, though with slight differences in method. This has led some to believe that the concept of Scaphism, or something close to it, was more common than we think. The idea even made its way into literature centuries later. In the plays of William Shakespeare, there are moments where characters speak of being flayed alive, coated in honey, and left to the mercy of bugs. Whether these were inspired by real practices or were the result of the human imagination running wild, the fact remains the same: people believed such a punishment could exist. And that, in itself, is terrifying. But Scaphism didn't just stop in the pages of ancient history or old plays. It reappeared in literature again, this time in the 19th century. A man named H. Rider Haggard, a British author known for his adventure novels, wrote about Scaphism in his book, The Ancient Allen. In the story, a character is sentenced to death in the boats. Haggard's description is vivid and disturbing. He explores not just the physical torment, but the psychological horror that sets in when a person realizes they're being eaten alive, day after day, with no chance of escape. Let's get into the chilling details. Scaphism, a step-by-step process. When a man is sentenced to execution by Scaphism, the first step is to completely strip him of everything he owns or knows. This does not just mean taking off his clothes, it also means taking away his identity, his dignity, and any last bits of hope he might still be holding on to. The man becomes nothing more than a body prepared for torment. From that moment, he is no longer seen as a human being. He is now a target for pain and a tool to make a cruel example. Next, the man is forced into a tight wooden container, usually formed from two matching boats placed on top of each other, or sometimes a hollow tree trunk split in half. His head, arms, and legs stick out while the rest of his body is tightly enclosed in the middle section. This wooden structure becomes both a trap and a tomb, locking him in one position and giving him no way to move, fight back, or find relief. It is as if his fate is being sealed shut with the boards that close around him. Some may think that maybe, just maybe, someone will come to show mercy. But this punishment was never made for mercy. It was designed to push the limits of what a person could feel and survive. The goal was not quick death. It was long, dragged-out suffering that tested the mind, body, and spirit. Even nature is turned against the victim, but that is not where the torture ends. In fact, it is only the beginning. The next phase is forced feeding. This is when the executioners return with bowls of milk and honey, not to nourish him, but to ruin him from the inside. The mixture is poured into his mouth again and again until his stomach becomes painfully full and stretched. It feels like he might burst. What might sound sweet is actually bitter in effect. Too much milk and honey cause the body to break down, leading to severe diarrhea. Since he cannot move or clean himself, the waste stays trapped with him, soaking into his skin and into the wooden box. This mess becomes a breeding ground for bacteria and infections. His skin becomes raw, his lower body starts to burn and itch. The stench is unbearable. The air turns heavy with the smell of rot and waste. But the executioners are not finished. To make things worse, they smear more honey on the parts of his body that are exposed. His face, neck, hands, and feet are covered in it. This sticky layer acts like a signal, calling every insect nearby to come and feed. Flies arrive first, crawling over his skin and landing in swarms. Ants follow, biting into his flesh. Soon wasps and bees come, attracted by the honey, and they sting repeatedly. Each sting causes swelling, boils, and constant irritation. As his wounds grow, flies begin to lay eggs on his skin. These eggs hatch into maggots that start digging into his flesh, opening holes and eating their way inside. The pain grows worse every hour. The victim is still alive, still aware, and still helpless to stop any of it. His body is breaking down, but the executioners ensure he stays alive by continuing to feed him the same milk and honey, keeping him conscious just to feel it all. Then comes the drying heat of the sun. The victim lies under it all day with no protection. His skin starts to peel, crack, and burn. At night, the cold causes his muscles to spasm. He shivers uncontrollably. His lips turn white and dry, and his throat feels like sandpaper. Yet when he begs for water, all he receives is more milk and honey, making him sicker. To make things even more horrific, he is often placed near dirty, still water. This attracts mosquitoes that suck his blood and leeches that attach themselves to his skin. Small animals like rats and mice come to chew on his fingers, ears, and even his nose. They smell the infection and come to gnaw away at the soft, exposed tissue. He cannot defend himself or even cry properly as his body weakens further. This nightmare can stretch on for days or even weeks. The man is left to rot while still breathing. Eventually, the body can no longer handle it. Dehydration sets in. The infection spreads deeper. Organs fail, the heart slows down, and breathing becomes faint and shallow. The man dies not quickly, but in pieces, with his mind likely broken long before his final breath. What is left behind is not a body in the normal sense. It is bones mixed with blackened skin, crawling with insects, surrounded by a cloud of stench. Anyone who sees what remains is likely to carry that image forever. And from this, one thing becomes clear. Scaphism was never just about killing. So, what is the purpose of Scaphism? Purpose of Scaphism. To truly understand the terrifying purpose of Scaphism, we must go back to the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire. This was one of the greatest empires in ancient history, and not without reason. With rulers like Cyrus the Great and Darius I, the empire expanded rapidly, stretching from modern-day Turkey in the west all the way to the edge of India in the east. It was an empire built on wealth, strategy, and sheer strength. But beyond its size and power, the Persian Empire stood tall because of its strict systems of order, loyalty, and justice. Persian society was deeply rooted in discipline. The people were taught to obey the king without question. Acts of betrayal were seen as not just crimes, but dangerous threats to the entire kingdom. Treason, especially, was not just a violation of the law. It was seen as a direct attack on the king himself. And the consequences were severe. Treason came in many forms. It could be leaking information to the enemy, plotting against the king, abandoning one's duty as a soldier, or even spreading rebellion. A trusted advisor turning against the court, a soldier fleeing during war, or a nobleman secretly supporting a rival, all were considered traitors. These were not small mistakes. The Persian mindset saw treason as a poison that could spread if not crushed quickly and brutally. That is why, in their eyes, such acts deserved punishments that went beyond death. They needed to send a message. While Persian kings were known to be fair and diplomatic in many ways, especially when dealing with other cultures and regions under their rule, they had no patience when it came to betrayal. Justice for treason was not swift, but painful and public. This is where Scaphism comes in. Scaphism was not a punishment given out lightly or casually. It was saved for those who had committed the worst crimes against the empire, people who were seen as traitors, military deserters, spies, and those who challenged the throne or disrespected the divine authority of the king. In short, Scaphism was for enemies from within. In Persia, a thief might lose a hand, and a murderer might be executed, But a traitor suffered a fate worse than death. This fear helped keep the empire strong. People were afraid to even think of betraying the crown. It was known that if they crossed that line, there would be no mercy and no escape. The Persian military was one of the most disciplined in the ancient world. Soldiers followed a strict code of conduct and swore loyalty to the king. Desertion, even out of fear or illness, was considered treason. If a soldier abandoned his post, he wasn't just fleeing battle, he was turning his back on the entire empire. For that reason, even military men risked the horror of Scaphism if they failed in their duty. This same strictness extended to the royal court. A noble who secretly plotted against the king, an official who accepted bribes to weaken the empire, or a spy working for the enemy. These people were considered major threats. If they were caught, they weren't given a quick end. Instead, they were placed in the infamous boats to suffer in front of all. The method of their punishment became a warning that betrayal would not only be punished but remembered. What made Scaphism truly terrifying wasn't just the physical suffering. It was the fear it created in others. It was used as a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. Everyone knew what it meant to be sentenced to the boats. They had heard the stories. They had seen the aftermath. The fear alone was often enough to keep people in line. It made even the idea of disloyalty feel like a death sentence. It wasn't just justice, it was fear used as control. Persia may be remembered today for its incredible buildings, road systems, and acceptance of various cultures, but its justice system was brutal when it needed to be. And Scaphism wasn't the only gruesome method of punishment. The Persians also used crucifixion to make examples of enemies. They tied or nailed people to poles and left them in the hot sun for days. Some were torn apart by wild animals during public shows. Others were impaled, with sharp poles driven through their bodies until they died slowly in agony. Victims might be skinned alive or boiled. These punishments were designed to shock, to terrify, and most importantly, to teach. The truth is, Scaphism wasn't just about killing someone. It was a clear and painful statement. It showed everyone what would happen if they dared to betray the empire. It was meant to draw a line that could not be crossed. It told the people where loyalty ends and punishment begins. A Byzantine historian named Ioannis Zonaras wrote about Scaphism in the 12th century. Though he lived long after the Persian Empire, he studied ancient records and was fascinated by how cruel and calculated Scaphism was. Zonaras retold an earlier account from Plutarch and described how this punishment affected not just the body, but the mind. It wasn't just physical torture. It was psychological torment designed to break a person completely. In his writing, Zonaras explained that Scaphism turned the victim into a living example. The person would not die quickly. Instead, they were fed and kept alive for as long as possible, only to witness their own slow destruction. They were forced to lie in their own waste, their bodies covered in honey, attracting insects that slowly ate them alive. The victim couldn't move or fight back. All they could do was feel everything, including the bites, the infections, the rot. The worst part was that this punishment wasn't done in secret. The person was left in public, where people could watch. Some looked on with pity, others with fear. But no one could help. That was the point. It created a powerful memory in everyone who saw it or heard about it. Even the executioners were affected. Their job was to keep the victim alive and suffering. They had to force food into the person's mouth. They had to rub honey on the body again and again to keep the insects coming. They had to check if the victim was still alive and make sure death didn't come too soon. Imagine doing this every day. It left a mark on the mind of not just the victim, but the one carrying out the punishment. Though Scaphism faded away with time, its idea lived on in other cultures. The Roman Empire developed its own version of painful public punishment, which was the crucifixion. Victims were stripped, beaten, and nailed to crosses. They hung for hours or days, struggling to breathe until they died. It was brutal, but also quick compared to Scaphism. In crucifixion, people usually died from blood loss or suffocation. But Scaphism dragged death out slowly and allowed nature to do the killing. The influence of Scaphism even reached Japan. In some parts of medieval Japan, criminals were tied to wooden stakes or left in cages near swamps, where they were exposed to insects, animals, and disease. These punishments were long and painful, often leading to death by natural forces. It was a sign that the idea of suffering before death had spread. In the 20th century, during World War II, Japan's Unit 731 carried out terrible experiments on prisoners. Some were exposed to insects and parasites just to see how wounds would rot over time. Others were left in swamp-like conditions to watch how disease spread. These acts were horrifying and carried out in secret, but they had one thing in common with Scaphism: the goal of seeing a human body slowly destroyed while still alive. But even then, Scaphism stands alone as one of the worst punishments ever created. Other methods may be cruel, but none combine so much pain, shame, helplessness, and fear as Scaphism. It was not just a punishment. It was a tool used by powerful rulers to control their people through terror. What do you think about Scaphism? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more.